Most people believe disasters come with warnings. A phone call in the middle of the night, a doctor stepping into a waiting room, a police officer standing at the front door. But sometimes, life changes much more quietly. Sometimes, it changes with a single click. 27 seconds. That was all it took. 27 seconds to place an ordinary family at risk of losing the home they had spent more than a decade building. And the worst part? No one forced anyone to do it. No one hacked an account. No one stole an identity. Someone simply clicked a blue button that said, "I agree." Before this story continues, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you've ever accepted terms and conditions without reading them. Millions of people do it every day, believing nothing bad could possibly happen. But after hearing this story, many viewers say they never look at online agreements the same way again. Michael Bennett was 39 years old and lived with his wife Laura and their 11-year-old daughter Sophie in Phoenix, Arizona. Their house wasn't impressive. It wasn't large, it wasn't luxurious, but it was home. A small 3-bedroom house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. There was a tree in the backyard that Sophie loved climbing. Laura had planted roses along the front walkway. Michael had spent years repainting rooms, repairing fences, replacing old appliances, and slowly transforming the property into a place where his family felt safe. He still remembered carrying Sophie into the house as a newborn. She had been wrapped in a pink blanket. Laura had cried that day, not because she was sad, but because they finally had something they had dreamed about for years, a home that belonged to them. Michael worked in IT support for a healthcare company. Laura taught 4th grade. They weren't wealthy. They budgeted carefully. Mortgage payments were always made on time. Vacations were modest. Pizza on Friday nights was considered a tradition. Life was predictable. And Michael loved predictable. Predictable meant safety. Predictable meant stability. Predictable meant his daughter would never have to worry about where she would sleep. Every morning looked exactly the same. Coffee, traffic, podcasts, emails, printer problems, meetings, dinner, homework, Netflix, sleep, repeat. Like millions of people, Michael had also developed another habit, a dangerous habit. He stopped reading contracts, privacy updates, software licenses, bank disclosures, insurance changes, streaming service agreements. He clicked accept. He clicked continue. He clicked agree. Over and over again. Because who really reads 30 pages of legal language? At least, that's what he believed. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Michael was eating lunch at his desk when his phone vibrated. An email notification appeared. Sender, Home First Mortgage Services. Subject, important, action required to maintain online services. At first, he ignored it. Then he noticed a red banner. Final notice. That immediately caught his attention. He opened the message. Everything looked legitimate. The logo was correct. His account number matched. The payment history was accurate. The email explained that the company was updating its online mortgage platform. Customers needed to review and approve new digital servicing terms. Failure to complete the process might temporarily interrupt online payment access. Michael sighed. Another update, another waste of time. He clicked the link. A web page appeared. 32 pages. Small font, dense paragraphs, electronic communications, third-party partnerships, property servicing clauses, arbitration language, the usual legal nightmare. At the bottom was a blue button. I agree. Michael glanced at the clock. 7 minutes remained in his lunch break. He never scrolled. He never read a single page. He never asked questions. He simply clicked. 27 seconds. Done. Then he closed the tab, returned to work, and completely forgot about it. For 3 months, nothing happened. No suspicious emails, no warnings, no strange phone calls. Life continued exactly as before, which later became the cruelest realization of all. Disasters rarely arrive screaming. Most disasters allow people to feel comfortable first. Comfortable enough to believe they're safe. Comfortable enough to stop paying attention. Comfortable enough to lower their guard. And then they strike. 3 months after clicking that button, Michael was trimming hedges in his front yard when a white SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 strangers stepped out. A man in a gray suit and a woman holding a clipboard. Michael smiled politely. "Can I help you?" The woman checked her paperwork. "Michael Bennett?" "Yes." She nodded. "We're representatives from Southwest Property Management." Michael frowned. "Okay." The man adjusted his glasses. "We're here to conduct an occupancy inspection." Michael laughed. "Occupancy inspection? I think you have the wrong address." The woman looked directly into his eyes. "No, sir. This property was transferred to an investment trust 67 days ago." Michael stopped smiling. For a moment, he honestly thought they were joking. Transferred? His house? Impossible. He had never missed a payment. He had owned the house for 12 years. There had to be some mistake. But deep inside, for the first time in months, he felt something unsettling. Fear. And he had absolutely no idea that within a few weeks, his daughter would draw a picture that would nearly break his heart. Michael tried convincing himself the 2 visitors had made a mistake. Maybe someone had entered the wrong address. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe county records had been mixed up. Anything seemed more believable than the possibility that his family's home somehow belonged to someone else. Laura stepped outside moments after the SUV disappeared. "Who were they?" she asked. Michael forced a smile. "Probably scammers." She studied his expression. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm not." That afternoon, Michael called Home First Mortgage Services. After spending more than 40 minutes listening to hold music, someone finally answered. Her name was Angela. Michael explained everything. The occupancy inspection, the strange claim, the investment trust, the visitors. There was silence. Typing. Then more silence. Finally, Angela spoke. "Mr. Bennett? According to our records, your mortgage servicing agreement was modified." Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you consented to participation in an alternative asset management program." Michael blinked. "What?" "You electronically signed the agreement on October 14th. "I signed an update." Angela paused. "No, sir. You signed an authorization that allowed third-party servicing arrangements under specific conditions. Michael's stomach tightened.
I never agreed to transfer my house. We don't show a sale. What we show is a reassignment of ownership interests under a distressed asset contingency. Michael sat down. His knees suddenly felt weak. I've never missed a payment. I understand, but the agreement does not require delinquency. That sentence hit him harder than anything else. It didn't require late payments. It didn't require bankruptcy. It didn't require financial hardship. Just a signature. Or rather, a click. Michael searched through his email history. Eventually, he found the message. October. 32 pages. Attached as a PDF. He downloaded it. Started reading. Page 1. Nothing unusual. Page 5. Boring legal jargon. Page 10. More definitions. Page 16. Electronic communication clauses. Page 23. Still nothing alarming. Then, page 24. A paragraph buried between two unrelated sections. The title read, Alternative Equity Preservation Participation. The wording was almost impossible for an ordinary person to understand. It referred to affiliated investment entities, transfer rights, servicing contingencies, asset optimization, risk mitigation, corporate language that sounded harmless. But beneath it was Michael's electronic signature. Time-stamped, verified, legally binding. Laura sat beside him. What does it mean? Michael stared at the screen. For the first time in their marriage, he couldn't answer. Because he honestly didn't know. But he feared he already understood enough. Someone was acting as if they owned their house, and they might have the paperwork to prove it. A week later, the nightmare became real. Michael opened the mailbox after work. Inside sat a plain white envelope. No logo, no return address. Just his name. He almost threw it away, but something told him to open it. He unfolded the letter, and his entire body went cold. It was an official notice. Notice to vacate premises. 30 days. 30 days to leave his own house. The document referred to his family as occupants, not owners. Occupants. As if 12 years of payments meant absolutely nothing. Laura read it twice, then looked at him. No. She shook her head. This has to be fake. I wish it was. What do we do? Michael swallowed hard. I call a lawyer. 2 days later, attorney David Klein reviewed the documents. David had practiced real estate law for 30 years. Michael desperately hoped the man would laugh. Tell him it was absurd. Explain it was a misunderstanding. Instead, David called and said 6 words Michael would never forget. You need to sit down. Michael sighed. Because this isn't fraud. What? It isn't identity theft. It isn't hacking. It isn't forgery. Then what is it? David hesitated. It's legal. Michael stood up, started pacing. How? You accepted the agreement. I didn't read it. I believe you, but courts generally don't consider unread contracts a defense. Michael rubbed his forehead. So I lose my house because I clicked a
button? Not necessarily. There are still options. What options? We can challenge disclosure practices. We can argue deceptive formatting. We can claim lack of informed consent. David paused. But companies like this spend millions making sure their contracts survive lawsuits. Michael felt sick. He barely slept, barely ate.
At work, he stared at computer screens without understanding what he was looking at. Laura smiled less, talked less, worried more. The house suddenly felt different. Every room carried uncertainty. Every family photo became a reminder that memories could apparently be taken away with paperwork. Then, one evening, Sophie walked into the living room. She was carrying a drawing. She smiled proudly. "I made this for my room." Michael looked down. It was a picture of their house. A blue roof, a tree. 3 stick figures holding hands. Above them, she had written, "Home forever." Michael almost broke down. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure if she would still have a room there next month. If this story is keeping you hooked so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the scariest mistakes aren't dramatic at all. Sometimes they're hidden inside documents we never bother reading. That night, Michael sat alone in the dark. The contract remained open on his laptop. 32 pages. He decided to read every word, slowly, carefully, searching for anything at all. Hours passed. Midnight. 1 in the morning. 2. At exactly 2:17 a.m., he found it. 1 sentence. 14 words. Hidden on page 28. Smaller font than everything surrounding it. Participants retain the right to contest transfers within 90 calendar days. Michael checked the date. October 14th, January 15th. He looked at the clock. It was January 16th. He had missed it. Or had he? Then he realized something. The clause referred to business processing dates, not submission dates. He still had until midnight. Less than 24 hours. 1 chance. 1 final opportunity. And he had absolutely no idea how to use it. Michael barely slept. At 7 o'clock the next morning, David called again. "Michael?" "Yeah?" "Before we submit anything, there's something you need to see." "What is it?" "I found other cases." Michael straightened in his chair. "What kind of cases?" "People who signed agreements almost identical to yours." His heartbeat quickened. "So I'm not the only one?" David sighed. "Not even close." A few minutes later, several documents arrived in Michael's inbox. The first case involved a retired couple from Nevada. They had refinanced their home. Several months later, investors claimed rights attached to their mortgage. They settled quietly, sold most of their belongings, moved into a small apartment. The husband died less than a year later. The second case involved a single mother from Texas. She discovered the clause too late. She missed the deadline by 6 days. She lost her home. The third story disturbed Michael the most. A construction supervisor from Florida. Perfect credit, stable job, never missed a payment. He spent 2 years fighting, nearly $80,000 in legal fees, and still lost. At the bottom of his testimony was one sentence. Michael read it over and over. "I wasn't defeated by criminals. I was defeated by paperwork." Michael leaned back. Paperwork. Paragraphs, buttons, checkboxes, things millions of people ignored every day. Suddenly, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello?" A woman spoke softly. "Is this Michael Bennett?" "Yes." "My name is Sarah. I saw your filing." Michael frowned. "What filing?" "The objection your attorney submitted." Michael became cautious. "How did you get that information?" "It's public." She paused. Then her voice trembled. "I lost my house because of that agreement." Silence filled the room. Michael finally asked, "When?" 2 years ago. "And now?" Sarah hesitated. "My marriage ended. My son barely talks to me. I don't want another family going through what mine did." They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. Sarah arrived carrying a thick binder. She looked exhausted. Stress seemed to have aged her by 10 years. She sat down, placed the binder on the table. "I collected everything: emails, court records, presentations, investor reports." Michael opened the first page. Corporate branding, professional graphics. One slide caught his attention immediately. The title read, "Homeowner Transition Optimization Program." Underneath was a sentence that made his stomach turn. "Consumer engagement rates increase significantly when disclosures are integrated into mandatory digital updates." Michael looked up. They knew. Sarah nodded. They counted on people not reading. She smiled sadly. They weren't stealing houses. They were designing systems that depended on trust. Michael suddenly felt anger replacing fear. Because this wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. And families like his had become statistics. Targets, numbers, data points. Not people, not children, not memories, just opportunities. At that moment, Michael's phone buzzed. An email notification. Sender, Southwest Property Management. Subject, final occupancy reminder. Michael opened it. His blood ran cold. The deadline had changed. 30 days had become 10. 10 days before strangers could legally walk into Sophie's bedroom. 10 days before someone else owned 12 years of family memories. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Michael stopped feeling afraid. He became furious. Because this was no longer about contracts. It was about protecting his family. And he decided he wasn't going down quietly. If you're still watching, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like Michael's remind us that ordinary people can sometimes face extraordinary systems. And sometimes, the only thing more powerful than fear is refusing to stay silent. Sarah spent the weekend at Michael and Laura's house. Papers covered the dining room table. David joined through a video call. Court documents, archived websites, investor reports, public filings. One thing stood out. None of these programs were openly advertised. No television commercials, no brochures, no customer emails explaining them clearly. They always appeared in updates.
privacy changes, platform migrations, electronic consent renewals, routine notices. Always hidden, always disguised as something harmless. David finally spoke.
I've researched the company. And? Michael asked. It's bigger than we thought. How big? They've acquired interests connected to more than 2,000 properties. Laura looked shocked. 2,000? David nodded. Most people never challenged it. Why? Because they believed they had no chance. Sarah lowered her eyes. That's exactly what happened to me. My husband wanted to fight, but we couldn't afford years in court, so we gave up. Silence filled the room. Then David smiled. Michael. Yes? You still have one advantage. Michael laughed bitterly. An advantage? Yes. What? You filed the objection. So? Ownership hasn't been fully finalized. It creates uncertainty, and investors hate uncertainty. For the first time in months, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. What do we do? David smiled. We make noise. Noise? Media. Consumer advocates. Journalists. Housing agencies. Regulators. They rely on silence. They expect homeowners to feel embarrassed. They expect people to think they were stupid. But this wasn't stupidity. It was manipulation. That night, Michael wrote a post online. Nothing emotional, just facts. Screenshots, dates, documents, evidence. Then he went to sleep, expecting nothing. The next morning, his phone exploded. Hundreds of comments, thousands of shares, messages from strangers, people saying, "It happened to us. My parents lost their home. I thought I was alone. Thank you for speaking up." Then reporters started calling. A consumer rights blogger wanted an interview. A local television station asked to feature his story. And then David called again. They're nervous. Who? The company's lawyers. What do they want? David smiled. They want to discuss settlement. Michael stared. Settlement? Yes. They're afraid. Afraid of what? David leaned closer. Exposure. For months, Michael believed he was fighting an unbeatable machine. But machines are built by people. And people panic. People make mistakes. People try to protect themselves. Someone inside that company was beginning to panic. And 3 days later, a mysterious envelope would arrive. Inside it was a flash drive. And what Michael discovered on that flash drive would finally reveal a terrifying truth. His family had never been chosen by accident. They had been selected. Deliberately. Michael stared at the flash drive for nearly an hour. It looked ordinary. Small, black, cheap. But somehow, it felt more dangerous than any eviction notice. Laura sat beside him. Are you going to open it? I don't know. What if it's malware? What if it's evidence? What if it's both? She sighed. For months, she had tried to stay strong. She smiled for Sophie. She cooked dinner. She pretended everything would be okay. But Michael could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She wasn't sleeping. Neither was he. "We can't keep living like this," Laura said quietly. "I know." "No." She shook her head. "You don't. I wake up every night wondering if strangers are going to knock on our door. I wonder if Sophie will ask why someone is taking her room. I wonder if we're going to end up in a tiny apartment. And I keep asking myself." She paused. "How could one click do this to us?" Michael had no answer, because he was asking himself the exact same question. He grabbed an old laptop from the garage. If the flash drive contained malicious software, at least it wouldn't infect their main computers. He plugged it in. One folder appeared. No password, no encryption. Just a folder called Selection Criteria. Michael opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, internal emails, PowerPoint presentations, performance reports, investor summaries. Then he noticed one file. The title made his stomach tighten. Ideal Candidate Profile. Candidate, not customer, not homeowner, candidate. He clicked. The first page listed characteristics associated with homeowners who were least likely to fight back. Stable employment, perfect payment history, no history of lawsuits, families with children, moderate income, frequent use of digital banking, regular acceptance of electronic disclosures. Michael stopped breathing for a moment. Laura leaned closer. "Oh my God." He continued reading. Another section appeared. Behavioral indicators. One sentence stood out. Consumers who routinely accept digital agreements without review demonstrate increased probability of passive transition outcomes. Passive transition. That was the company's term. Not eviction, not displacement. Passive transition. Corporate language designed to make suffering sound efficient. Then Michael opened an email chain. An executive had written, "Focus acquisition efforts on households least likely to challenge transfers." Another employee replied, "Families with children demonstrate higher voluntary relocation rates to avoid prolonged disputes." Laura covered her mouth. They targeted families. Michael nodded. They knew parents would do almost anything to protect their children from stress. His phone rang. David. Michael answered immediately. "David? Mike? I've got good news." "What?" "A television station wants your story." "When?" "Tomorrow night." Michael smiled. After months of silence, people were finally listening. "I have something to tell you too," Michael said. "I received anonymous documents." David became serious. "What kind?" "Internal company records. They mentioned targeting homeowners, families, children." David exhaled heavily. "Then this changes everything." "How?" "Because this may not just be deceptive contracting anymore." "What is it?" "It may be intentional consumer targeting." "Can we prove it?" "I don't know. But if journalists verify these documents, they won't only face lawsuits. They'll face investigations." For the first time in months, Michael felt genuine hope. Maybe Sophie would keep her bedroom.
Maybe Laura would finally sleep peacefully. Maybe
The nightmare was ending. But at 9:43 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Measured. Michael looked through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, holding a leather folder. He looked directly toward the door, almost as if he already knew Michael was watching. Then he spoke. "Mr. Bennett, my employer would like to make you an offer, and I believe you'll find it very difficult to refuse." Michael stepped outside. The man smiled politely. "My name is Jonathan Pierce. I represent parties involved in your current dispute. I'd like 5 minutes." "What do you want?" Jonathan opened the folder. "My clients are prepared to settle." "Settle what?" "The property, the interviews, the documents, the media attention." "And?" Jonathan looked directly at him. "They're willing to pay $300,000. Michael stared. $300,000? Tax-free, within 48 hours. It was more money than Michael and Laura had ever saved, enough to buy another home, enough to erase debts, enough to start over. But there was a condition. Jonathan slid a contract toward him. 5 pages. A confidentiality agreement, withdrawal of legal objections, destruction of copied documents, no interviews, no public statements, no social media posts. Ever. Michael looked up. "So basically, you want me to disappear?" Jonathan smiled. "We prefer to call it closure." "You mean silence?" "We prefer to call it peace." Then Jonathan lowered his voice. "You have a daughter." Michael stiffened. "Yes." "You've suffered enough. Take the money. Buy another house. Move on." The words sounded reasonable, comforting, even compassionate. But underneath them, Michael felt pressure. Subtle pressure. The kind that doesn't threaten. The kind that suggests. The kind that says, fight if you want, but fighting hurts. Michael looked at the contract. Then he looked through the living room window. Sophie was asleep on the couch. Beside her was a drawing. Their house, their tree, their family. And 2 simple words. Home forever. At that moment, the decision became easy. This had never been about money. It had never even been about the house. It was about making sure another family never sat in a dark living room, wondering if a single click had destroyed their future. The next morning, Michael called Jonathan. "Have you decided?" "Yes." "And?" Michael smiled. "You can keep your money." Silence. Long silence. Then Jonathan finally spoke. "I hope you're prepared." "For what?" "For what comes next." The call disconnected. 3 hours later, the television station aired Michael's story. By midnight, millions of people had watched. By morning, regulators were calling. Journalists were asking questions. Consumer advocates demanded investigations. Mortgage companies updated disclosure policies. Families began reading contracts again.
Weeks later, the eviction notice was withdrawn. Investigations expanded. Several companies faced lawsuits. Some homeowners recovered their properties. Others received compensation. Not everyone won. Some losses couldn't be undone. But many families finally had hope. One evening, 6 months later, Michael received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Only one sentence. Because you spoke up, my parents got their house back. Michael sat quietly for a long time because he finally understood something important. This story was never really about a house. It was about trust. Trust in systems. Trust in companies. Trust in the assumption that someone else always has our best interests at heart. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they hide life-changing decisions behind a blue button that simply says, I agree. If this story made you think twice about the agreements you accept every day, don't forget to like this video. It helps more people discover stories that matter. And if you enjoy emotional, cinematic stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary consequences, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story might change the way you look at everyday decisions forever. Sometimes, the smallest choice changes everything. And sometimes, the most powerful word a person can say is simply no. The end.